Good evening, everybody. Welcome once again to the Lepanto Institute's Anchor Team. I'm your host, Michael Hitchborn, and with me tonight is a very special guest. We've got Father Charles Murr, and I couldn't be more thrilled. He saw the interview that we did with Janet Smith, and he told me before getting on that he actually follows the show, and I was very tickled to hear that. And he said that he would be very interested in continuing the conversation that we were having with Dr. Smith. So tonight, what we're going to talk about, among other things, is the network of bishops and how they got appointed and who they were. And I want to get into all the nitty gritty and that kind of thing. But before we get into anything, we're going to go ahead and begin with our prayer led by Father Charles Murr. Father?
Certainly. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus.
Sancta Maria,
Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen.
Amen.
Our Lady of Victory, pray for us. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen.
Amen. So, Father, as we were discussing, we were going over some just some background notes between the two of us, and you were mentioning that you're older and wiser, and you know things. Well, no. What you said was that
no, Michael. I said exactly the contrary. I said I'm not wiser. I'm just older.
But one of the things that I had mentioned to you was that my grandparents, and I've mentioned this on the show before, my grandparents were very involved in fighting the communists in the 1950s and 60s and into the 70s. But one of the things that I haven't mentioned to my audience yet, that I told you just a few minutes ago, is that my grandmother used to actually maintain a list of good bishops and bad bishops. And by good and bad, I'm not talking about moral and immoral. I'm talking about those that were acting in line with the church's authentic teachings and those that were actually contradicting and contravening what the church has always taught. And she started maintaining this list in the mid to late 60s. And as far as I know, and I've got all of her notes somewhere in my office, she used to keep a daily journal, just jotting down little things that would come up in the news. It was very interesting just flipping through the things that she would mention. But one of the things that you had said in previous interviews, and I would like for you to really talk about this, is the placement of these bishops, who they are, how they got to be in the positions that they're in. And I'd like to kind of go into some of the damage that they've wrought on the church in the United States. So let's start with the position of placing bishops. Who was the cardinal there that we were discussing, and what was the role?
Yes. First of all, thank you very much for your invitation to be on the show. I appreciate it much. The man who was in charge in the specific time period that I lived through and wrote about was Sebastian Cardinal Baggio, Baggio. And getting back to what you just said in the intro, if your listeners are really listening, they'll understand this. The Catholic Church is the way to salvation. It's the only ticket into heaven. All right, we know that. There is no salvation outside of it. But its bishops are fundamentally important. They're fundamentally important to the Catholic Church. They were instituted by Christ. This was started by Christ. He had 12 apostles. They were the first 12 bishops. We should never forget that one of the 12 was Judas, okay? Yeah. Because that'll tell you right off, that'll give you the human element in the whole thing. But the church is built on those apostles, built on those bishops. Therefore, the bishops who are named to be bishops all over the world are very important men, and they should be of one heart and one mind when it comes to things Catholic. Unfortunately, today they are not. All right. We understand that when we can see the division that is wrought. In the 1970s, and this is why what I lived through and wrote about. And believe me, Michael, I'm not here selling books. I'm not trying to sell a book. That's not what it's about. It's about the question in say. I lived in Rome during the 1970s, all of the 1970s. And in 1975, throughout the 70s and into the 80s, we had a man who was creating all of the bishops in the world. His name was Cardinal Baggio, Baggio, first name Sebastiano. He was the head of the Congregation for the Bishops. I can't exaggerate the importance of that position, because this is the man who is naming all of the bishops all over the world. Let's say that there are 2,500 bishops, just to round up the number. Well, he named the majority of them. Why? Because Pope Paul VI, in the late 60s, decided that every bishop at the age of 75 should retire or present his letter of resignation. Now, the Vatican was still free to keep that man on if they wanted to. But it was a norm now at 75 to retire, and most of them retired. That meant, and let's just get this clear for your audience also, before that happened, if a man was 104 years old and he was a bishop, he was still the bishop of his diocese.
Right.
It was like the Pope. Bishops never resigned. They did not retire.
Yeah.
Unless there was some grave reason of health, right? But the bishop was the bishop. It's like our pastors too in churches. The pastor, when he was named a pastor, he was pastor for life. Right? They didn't change people around every 6 years. It was, if this church belonged to Father so-and-so, this church, you knew that. And there was a spirit of those men in those places, right? Well, to get back to what we're talking about, Cardinal Baggio was appointed, and Cardinal Baggio was appointed to name all of the new bishops in the world. Now, you've got to remember that all of them are retiring at 75. So there was an incredible bunch of bishops to name, to replace.
Yeah.
Here's the problem.
If I may ask,
Cardinal
Baggio, do you think that Cardinal Baggio actually convinced the Pope that he should institute a retirement age so that he could then appoint all of these bishops?
No, I don't think so. I don't believe that. I think, well, first of all, it happened before Baggio was in office.
Okay.
This is, I think it was 1967 or 68 when that came in. Baggio came in 1972, but I think this was a consequence of the council in that sense. And one of the changes they wanted to make to become modernized. And this if you wanted to modernize the church, that was an okay place to do it. Also, Pope Paul VI, for example, modernized the Cardinal of Colleges, the College of Cardinals, by saying that at age 80, they could no longer vote. That never happened either. Again, if you had a cardinal who was 104 years old, he voted, right? So this limiting things, and I think after we saw what happened with Biden in the last 4 years, we can understand that in many of these cases, it's a good idea. It's not a bad idea to retire, right? It's really not a bad idea. What was a bad idea is having put in Cardinal Baggio to name the new bishops all over the world. Why? Because Cardinal Sebastian Baggio was a Freemason.
Yep.
And of that, there is no doubt, right? There just isn't any doubt. And he had his own program to name liberal bishops. Let me just jump into something over here, Michael, and you'll understand this. You're way ahead of me on this. It sounds like I'm jumping all over the place, but I'm really not. It's going to come together, I hope. When Pope Pius X talked about modernism, he called it the synthesis of all heresies.
Yep.
That's very important that people know that.
Hmm.
The synthesis of all heresies, Marxism, Jansenism,
Yep.
anything, any heresy, Arianism,
Yeah.
Gnosticism, any heresy, all of them put together is called modernism.
Yep.
So when we say, it's like the term we use right now, the left says, right? Or the right says, right? Modernists are any group who hold on to a heresy from the beginning of the church up until now, right?
Yeah.
Nihil novum sub sole, nothing new under the sun. It's the same thing. So the modernists, the Freemasons also are a heretical group. They are Gnostics.
Absolutely, yeah. Yep.
All right. They are
Yep.
Gnostics. So now we have a Gnostic, we have a Freemason who is now naming the bishops of the world. And he was in power. Oh, goodness, I want to get the dates right. I think it's 1973 to 1984.
That sounds
And
right.
his plan was to name liberal bishops. He said so. Jadot, do you remember Jadot? He wasn't nuncio, he was apostolic delegate. Apostolic delegate is when when a nation doesn't have official relations with the Vatican. When they do have official relations with the Vatican, the man is called a nuncio, right? So at that time, the United States did not have an official relationship with the Vatican, so we did not have a nuncio. We had an apostolic delegate. His name was Jadot, Jean Jadot, a Belgian. And he gave an interesting interview that I read when I was a teenager yet. I remember it. He gave an interview to Time magazine. We got Time magazine at our house. It was sort of like the secular Bible. And I remember reading it because it was in the section of religion, and I was always kind of interested in religion, as I think you can see.
Yes, a little bit.
But Jadot gave an interview, his retirement interview to Time magazine, and he said that he was very proud of the fact that after having been delegate to the United States, he sent the names of bishops to Rome. Rome selected them, but they selected from his 3 names. For example, the Diocese of Dubuque is empty. We need a new bishop there. Well, I'll send you 3 priests from different places who I think are bishop material. The apostolic delegate or the nuncio sends those names to the Congregation for Bishops. They decide from those names which men. Well, Jadot, the apostolic delegate to the United States, gave an interview to Time magazine praising himself for having put in over 70 men, I don't know if it was 72, 78, liberal bishops. Liberal, that's exactly what he called them, liberal bishops. Well, this is what we've been contending with for all of these years.
Right.
Baggio in Rome he picked up the ball when he was named to the Congregation for Bishops to name the bishops of the world. And he also named liberal bishops. Any conservative, if you will, conservative or Catholic bishop who was out there was replaced by a liberal-minded bishop. And again, this is when all of the crazy changes and everything else was coming into play. We didn't have the men in the right places to be able to contain the nonsense, to be able to direct. Again, let me make another aside. I was a very good friend of Mother Pasqualina. Mother Pasqualina was secretary of Pope Pius XII for almost 42 years. She was my godmother for ordination, priestly ordination in Rome.
Wow.
I thought she was a great person in my life. She told me that Pope Pius XII had actually planned a Second Vatican Council.
Really?
As a matter, Pope Pius XII, who died in 1958, before John the 23rd, had planned a Second Vatican Council, and he commissioned different people to put together programs that needed to be addressed. When they were all done, ready, he closed the whole project. And Mother Pasqualina asked him why he didn't want to go ahead with this council that he was planning on for 5 years, as a matter of fact. He said, quote, "Because the bishops of the world are not sufficiently mature to bring it to fruition." And these are the, if you will, these are the good old days. 1958, he died, right?
Yep.
He said at that time, the bishops of the world do not have the maturity necessary to bring this to fruition. Why? Because if you're going to introduce a new spirit of things to modernize a little bit, we have to remember too, modernization is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. There are things that have to be modernized a little bit. Things do change. You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, though, which is what happened.
Well, you know what's interesting? What's interesting about this, being in 1958 for Pope Pius XII to say that the bishops of that time were not mature enough to be able to substantiate a Second Vatican Council. It's right around the time period where Bella Dodd was actually going around and she was speaking. And one of the things that she had mentioned in a speech, and this is not in one of her books. A lot of people say that it was in her book, School of Darkness. It was not. She said, and this was in a speech that she delivered, I think it was outside the House Committee for Un-American Activities. She was giving a little conference and she was talking to people. So it was an off-the-cuff thing. And in this presentation where she was standing, she said that, she was actively recruiting young communists to join the seminaries back in the 1930s and 40s. And that, and she said that by the time she left the Communist Party, many of them had already been elevated to the position of bishop and cardinal. So that was in the 40s when she got out. And so for what Pius XII to have said that the bishops were not sufficiently mature enough, I think speaks to that very thing.
Yes. Why? Because if you're going to do something major, now Pius XII was not talking about destroying the Catholic Mass or destroying the sacraments. No. We're talking about different ways of going about things. Maybe even the mechanics of the church, something more up to date, something more modern, whatever. But he's not talking about destroying the sacramental life of the church. He decided that to go ahead with this project, he needed men that he could count on all over the world, and he didn't have them. So he scrapped the whole thing. To say that John the 23rd just kind of woke up one day, well, let's have a council. No, this is nonsense. The council was already studied 5 years before John the 23rd came into power as Pope. Anyway, that's that. Let me get back to this. The bishops that Cardinal Baggio appointed were mostly, and when I say mostly, I'm talking 85% liberals, ecumenical thinkers, open to this, open to that, people who were beginning to drop points of Catholic belief, points of faith, of church teaching. That's not so important. We'll put that over here. What's most important is the spirit, or the this, or the what. Those kind of people, right?
Right.
Let me give you another example. People who would say psychology should replace philosophy. People who would say, still today they do, psychology should replace theology.
Yeah.
We should, all of those kinds of people who are not clear thinkers. I would even go so far as to say those kind of people who really didn't have their faith cemented. Right. The faith, right? There were loose parts. Those were the candidates for bishops. They were open-minded to everything. Fine.
They're so open-minded, their brain fell out.
Well, you got that right. I just told this on another program. I studied at the Gregorian University. We had a great professor there, Father Marcozzi. And Father Marcozzi, one day, I don't know why, because it wasn't really related to what the theme was for the class that day. He said he came in lamenting the fact that there used to be 30,000 Jesuits. And this was like in 1974, 75. He said, we have now lost 10,000 Jesuits.
Wow.
Right. He said, do you know how many 10,000 men are of a group of 30,000? And I'll never forget it. He looked at us and he said, and that's not even the problem. Well, wow. What is the problem? He said, the problem is that we have to lose 10,000 more before we can start getting better.
Yeah.
That's the problem. Right? So with all this reform, when you have a man who is a Freemason and who is promoting liberalism all over the church, we had a real mess, and it was becoming a real mess in the 1970s.
You bet.
The reason that I wrote this book is, and about Cardinal Gagnon, first of all, I love Cardinal Edward Gagnon. He was just a magnificent man, great sense of humor, intelligent, and a real true believer. I mean, he had the faith, and it was so marvelous. We lived together for 2 years in Rome. The 2 years that he was in this investigation. Anyway, two cardinals. I'm not going to bother with people with names. If they want to, they can read a book. They're in a book, right? But two cardinals went to go see the Pope Paul VI, with proof positive. One of the cardinals, I can tell you his name, and it's important, is Staffa, Cardinal Dino Staffa, who at that time was head of the Segnatura Apostolica, which is the Supreme Court of the Catholic Church. Yep. He was the chief of that Supreme Court.
The position that Cardinal.
Yes, exactly. Well, documents came to his attention, and he had the documents absolutely studied, inside and out, by Interpol. Was one of the agencies that he used. It was serious. They were claiming that a Vatican cardinal by the name of Baggio in the Congregation for Bishops was a Freemason. Well, you don't just say, oh my gosh, he's a Freemason, let's get rid of him. You don't do that. You need to substantiate all of these claims. You have to be responsible for it. Well, he was. They were scrutinized for, 6 months to a year. He and another cardinal brought them to the Pope, the documents of proof against Baggio. This went on. They also did the same thing. Excuse me. They also did something a little bit before. We can get on that in another program if you wish. But they did the same thing to Bugnini, the architect of the new Mass. Right. The same thing was done to him because there were documents found that he was also in Freemasonry. But I don't want to get off this theme. Those were brought to the Pope. And after the Bugnini thing, when they got rid of Bugnini and sent him to Iran, the Pope looked at this again and decided that there was an investigation of the entire Roman Curia had to take place. He wanted an investigation of the entire Catholic hierarchy government in Rome, all the government offices of the church, the central government offices. They're called the Roman Curia, right? The Roman Curia are all of the offices. He wanted them all investigated. I'll make a long story short. He decided on Archbishop Edward Gagnon, who at that time was the rector of the Pontifical Canadian College, a Salesian father. He taught in seminary for years. Very good man. He was also a bishop in Canada, of Alberta. Anyway, he was chosen by the Pope because, without a question, he was one of the most honest men you would ever come across in life. If you would ask him to do something seriously, he would do something seriously, right? He was just honest. He didn't have a bias one way or the other on anything. The Pope asked him to take on this enterprise, this mission, and he did. And for 3 years, he investigated everyone who worked in the Vatican, especially and very seriously about 850 men, priests, bishops, and cardinals at that time were working in the Vatican. When he finished, his life was threatened. His rooms were ransacked. His office was ransacked. Vatican office was ransacked. Documents were stolen. It was horrible. And when his life was threatened, he came to live with us. And by us, I talk about a Monsignor Mario Marini, who was in the Secretary of State, and myself, and a third person by the name of Archbishop Hilarion Capucci. And he sounds Italian, but he's not. He's Syrian. And Archbishop Capucci, this sounds crazy. I mean, you wouldn't be able to make this up. Archbishop Capucci had been in an Israeli jail for 2 years.
Oh, wow.
Because Archbishop Capucci had transported illegally arms to the Palestinian Liberation Organization.
Oh my gosh.
In his car with diplomatic plates, right? They caught him in Israel. He was Archbishop Capucci was the Archbishop of Jerusalem for the Greeks, for the Greek what is it, the Melkite, right? Anyway, in Jerusalem, he was arrested, brought to prison, everything else. Well, long story short, they released him. The Israelis released him from prison if he promised never to come back to the Holy Land or to the Middle East. So they sent him to Rome. Well, they sent him to our house where we were living. We had manifestations. We had demonstrations.
Oh, wow.
People in favor, people against. The Jews, of course, came. They were against him. The Arab community came. They were for him. We had to be frisked to get in and out of our own home. It was incredible. But after everything died down, we still had an Israeli van and a Syrian car parked constantly at our home. So it was for security reasons. So we lived in, I say, and I'm not exaggerating, we lived in in the securest building in Europe. I can imagine. You've got the Jews over here and you've got the Arabs over here. It was right. So Gagnon said, after his life had been threatened for this investigation, we said, come and live with us. Come and live with us. We live you have to get frisked to go in and out.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Come and live with us. Right. Well, he did. And it was great. And we were always friends. We had been friends since I met him in, I think, 1973. We'd always been friends, and Marini and he were friends. So the three of us we were together all the time. And when he finished, I helped him a little bit just organizing papers. I didn't help him with the investigation, but I was just a priest a year when this was all happening. Anyway, when he finished in 1978, he asked me, what are you doing tomorrow or next day? I said, nothing. What can I do for you? He said, can you drive me to the Vatican so I can present this study to the Holy Father? I'm finished after 3 years. I said, absolutely, absolutely. So I drove him from our house with all of his documentation to the Vatican. He went up, spoke to Pope Paul VI, had all the documentation on his desk, and the Pope Paul VI pushed it back to him the way he told me. And he said, I can't do this. Leave it for my successor. Well, Gagnon left the audience. I'm waiting for him down in the Cortile San Damaso in the car.
Do you think
took him back home.
Do you think maybe it was because he knew that he was old and in ill health, or?
Yes, that's exactly, actually, he died 3 months later.
Oh, wow. Okay.
He died 4 months later. He died on
Hmm.
the 6th of August. And this would be in June, I think we went with the first trip. So the election comes and goes, and we have a new pope who I remember both Monsignor Marini and Archbishop Gagnon saying that it was going to be one of two people. It was going to be either Luciani, Cardinal Luciani of Venice, new pope, or Karol Wojtyła of Krakow.
Huh.
And I said, well, that's never going to happen. Who's ever heard of a non-Italian pope, right?
Right.
Anyway, so the man who's elected is Cardinal Luciani, takes the name John Paul I. And in all of this, the man who named Gagnon to do this study, and then the man who became a cardinal, and he was very influential in the conclave and everything else, is a man by the name of Giovanni Benelli, Benelli. He worked in the Secretary of State for Paul VI for years, and he was one sharp man, a good political mind, but very sharp diplomat, and a straight shooter. He was an enemy of Cardinal Villot, if you're acquainted with Cardinal Villot, who was Secretary of State during those years. But and if you're not acquainted with him, you're not missing anything. He's already gone. He's gone to where he's gone. I was going to say he's gone to God. Who knows? Anyway, Cardinal Benelli was managing things, and John Paul I was elected. John Paul I was Benelli's candidate. So John Paul I asked Benelli to be his Secretary of State.
Mm-hmm.
People, I don't think people realize how important it is to have, for a pope, also for a president, to have a Secretary of State in line with the pope or in line with the president. Do you remember just in the last when Trump was president last time, 45, the difficulty he was having at times with Pence as his vice president, right?
Yep.
Well, you can't have that. You've got to be of one mind. You really do, to get anything done. Paul VI was weak, and he had people who used him. Well, Luciani, when he came in, was also, he was a weak man. By weak, I mean not strong. He wasn't. He wasn't a determined guy. He was just kind of, all right, very charitable, very kind, very patient with everyone.
Rather sanguine and phlegmatic, maybe.
Yes, but he needed a strong man, and that strong man was Benelli. So he asked Benelli to be his Secretary of State. I've got to just decline this. There we go. I'm sorry about that. He asked Benelli to be his Secretary of State, and Benelli accepted with one condition. He said, actually two conditions. He said, I want you to speak with Archbishop Gagnon. I want you to read Gagnon's report, his investigation of the entire Roman Curia, because you've got to know the people who are surrounding you.
Yep.
He said also, you have to get rid of Cardinal Baggio from the congregation of bishops. He's got to go immediately. Right. And the Pope John Paul I said, well, how to do that? He said, he suggested, he didn't tell the Pope what to do. He said, well, Venice is open. I know it's open because you used to be the Archbishop of Venice. And now you're now Pope. So there's a position there for a cardinal to go. And he said, and in Venice, you have your own curia there. You've got good archbishops, you've got good auxiliary bishops and monsignors who are in the curia. They know you and trust you. They'll keep an eye on Baggio for you, so he doesn't get involved in anything else. Well, the Pope John Paul I, decided that was what he was going to do. He called Baggio, and various times Baggio was unable. he couldn't meet with the Pope. He had other
Mhm.
things to do.
Yeah.
Right. Well, finally, the Pope said to him, he called him on the phone and said, we need to talk. Well, I'm busy. I'm busy. He said, are you busy at 8 o'clock this evening? No, I don't know if you're a cardinal, I don't know why you would be busy at 8 o'clock in the evening, right? Dinner's
dinner.
over and everything else is good.
Yeah, right.
So he said, fine. So he came at about 8 o'clock at night, met with the Pope, and and let me just say this. That was the second time Gagnon and I brought the documentation to the Pope.
Right.
We brought it to John Paul I. We didn't bring it. I drove him. He brought it up and had the talk with the Pope. So he had already read Gagnon's report and Gagnon's recommendation. Number one was Baggio, to get rid of Baggio.
Yep.
So anyway, the Pope called in Baggio and offered him Venice.
Mm-hmm.
He refused.
Yep.
He refused.
Now, what's interesting about that, and I want to point.
Not only did he refuse, they got into. It wasn't they got into. Baggio got into a shouting brawl with the Pope. Started raising his voice and I'm not going. And who do you think you are? Who do you think made you a cardinal? I made you a cardinal. Blah 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 blah. Yeah. This was the Swiss guards who were outside of the doors heard the voice of Baggio, angry, rising. Yep. Anyway, after the meeting at 8 o'clock at night, it was the last meeting that the Pope had, of course, that day. Baggio left in a huff, more than a huff, very, very aggravated. And the Pope was dead within 3 hours after that. He died. Yep. He died that night. They said between 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock. I think they're talking about realistically now, but I do believe he died of a heart attack. But I believe that the heart attack was induced by that argument. Let me just put it that way. He died. So we've got now the third Pope. Right. that Cardinal Gagnon is going to see to deliver this thing. Right. He went to go see John Paul II. Paul II handed him. Yes.
Yeah. Before you get into that, I want to point out there's a reason why Baggio would refuse to leave, even though he was being given a cushy position. The thing about Marxists, and people need to understand this about the Politburo in the Soviet Union, is that the communists understood very, very well that you don't take over a governance by overwhelming the governing system with all of your people. All you need to do is take over key positions. And Baggio knew that he had taken over such an important key position that it would be disastrous to his agenda to leave it. So there was no way he was going to get out of that position.
Exactly. And just remember, where there is no bishop, there is no Catholic Church.
Right.
It's very simple. And these people depended on Baggio. And remember something else too. When I say that he made bishops, he also made cardinals. Because by naming, for example, the Archbishop of Philadelphia, in 6 months, the Archbishop of Philadelphia is going to be Cardinal of Philadelphia.
Yep.
Mexico City, you name an archbishop, within a year, he's a cardinal. So when Baggio is placing all of these people, he's also building up his own little empire. And he was in the running to become Pope. We came very close to having a Freemason Pope. It's incredible. It's incredible. But this is how bad things got. And it got that way. Why? Because we didn't have strong men in positions of popes. That's why.
I want to read something to you. This is from the permanent destruction of the Alta Vendita. It's the Masonic blueprint for taking over the Catholic Church. So this is a direct quote. And one of the things that in this portion of the Alta Vendita, what the writer is talking about is how to capture the papacy, to elevate someone who was formed by them to the papacy rather than actually elevating one of their own. And he says this, He said, now then, to assure ourselves of a pope of the required dimensions, it is a question first of shaping for this pope a generation worthy of the reign we are dreaming of. Leave old people and those of a mature age aside. Go to the youth, and if it is possible, even to the children. And this is the key point. You will contrive for yourselves at little cost a reputation as good Catholics and pure patriots. This reputation will put access to our doctrines into the midst of the young clergy, as well as deeply into the monasteries. In a few years, by the force of things, this young clergy will have overrun all the functions, which is exactly what we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
They will form the sovereign's council. They will be called to choose a pontiff who should reign. Now, the Alta Vendita is a Masonic document. And Baggio, being a Freemason, was doing exactly what this document called for. And I can't stress that point enough. I think people don't understand why Baggio was such an important figure to study, and to understanding how we got into the mess that we're in without understanding that document. They have to know that point to understand why it was so horrible what he was doing.
Right. Yeah, couldn't agree with you more. Couldn't agree with you more. So it's exactly right. And Baggio knew what he was doing and knew how to do it.
Yep.
He knew how to do it.
Yep.
All you have to do is follow the Alta Vendita. They've got it. But this was the situation that it came to. So we've got now the election of John Paul II. And in my book, I go into detail on that, but we've got an hour program, so we're keeping it a little bit short. John Paul II was elected Pope, and then he also asked Benelli to be his Secretary of State. But he didn't do it quickly enough. You see, what John Paul II did, he had Villot, who was Secretary of State of Paul VI and of JP1, because JP1 never got around to putting in Benelli, because Benelli said, I'll be your Secretary of State on the condition you get rid of Baggio. You do that. And the Pope said to him, well, you can get rid of Baggio as Secretary of State. And Benelli said, no, this is a signature move on your part as Pope.
Yep.
You have to do it. And people have to see that you did it.
Right.
It's important to the papacy. It's important to your prestige as a Pope and to the power that you're going to exert, right? In other things. They have to know who's running the show. You have to do it. Well, he died in that process. So JP2 came along and he kept Villot, because Villot had cancer. Few people knew that, but he smoked those terrible French cigarettes, the Gauloise. Have you ever been around in France when they're smoking Gauloise? Oh, they're horrible. No. They're just horrible. I mean, smoking is bad to begin with, but Gauloise it's like smoking perfume. I don't know how, but it's horrible. Oh. Anyway, he smoked Gauloise like crazy. Anyway, he had throat, esophagus cancer, everything else. He was dying, lung cancer. He died of, I think. And so he wasn't moved. So Gagnon went to go see him again. I drove Gagnon to his audience with Pope John Paul II. He gave him the documents again. This is the third Pope. And John Paul II said he wasn't going to do any major changes yet. And Gagnon said, "Well, Holy Father, I've been working on this 3 years. It's dynamite what you're handling here. I mean, this is important stuff. You should act on it, right?" He said, "No. He was going to go traveling. He was going to talk to the people. He was going to evangelize the world, right? Mm-hmm. That's what he was going to do. He wasn't going to clean house in the Vatican. Yeah. That wasn't important. What was important is going here, going there, preaching this. Well, that's fine. I don't mean to sound disrespectful, because I really did like him. He was a good man. I would have done. I would have changed a couple things that he did, but he was a good man. The problem was that well, while the cat's away, the mice will play.
I was
So
just going to say that.
yeah, you had these people, these scoundrels in many cases, running the entire show.
Yeah.
Every time he announced he was going to Nick, and he made 104 trips.
Yep.
Every trip, most of the trips required 2, 3, and 4 months of preparation.
Wow.
He wanted to learn the language. He wanted to give a speech in Vietnamese. He wanted to give a speech in Tukatanka of this. Well, you have to bring in tutors so he can learn even to read these things.
Yep.
He needed to know who the clergy were. Who were the bishops of Tukaklanka? Who was this? All of this was occupying his mind. And it was because we need to preach to the people, to evangelize. Well, every time he made a trip, there was applause in the Roman Curia. Yes, Holy Father, another trip.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, yes, they're waiting for you.
Here's a question for you. One of the rumors that I remember hearing surrounding the election of John Paul II is that they elected somebody who was not Italian, because you mentioned earlier that, oh, nobody's going to ever elect a non-Italian. But one of the rumors that I remember reading about was that at the time he was selected because there was a block of cardinals that was trying to bring someone in who was not a Freemason, and they didn't know who the Freemasons were. Had you heard anything about that?
Yeah, but what happened? It was different than that. You had, for that election, you had 3 candidates. You had Cardinal Siri of Genoa, and he had a sizable block of votes. You had Cardinal Baggio was a major candidate in both elections. And you had Cardinal Benelli. Well, Benelli knew exactly who Baggio was. And when he saw that Baggio was gaining votes, Benelli, threw his personality, his everything into it, in naming John Paul I and John Paul II. It was Benelli who proposed them as candidates. Wow. Because he knew that they were electable, and that they were good men. They believed in the church. They were not like Baggio, a Freemason.
Right.
And Siri, as good as he was, wasn't going to win the election because he didn't have enough votes, and then they were not coming to him. So Benelli in those 2 elections was the one who named. He proposed and he asked his brother cardinals to vote for Luciani of Venice, and then for Wojtyła, who he knew during the Second Vatican Council. He knew well as Pope. So it was a little bit different than that. But the point was that we went to go. We went to go. I'm saying I did not go to see the Pope. Right?
Right.
I took Cardinal Gagnon there, drove him there, and then drove him back home and waited for him. He went up to see the Pope, and the Pope said he wasn't going to do anything about that.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned.
Well, Gagnon came down on the elevator, and I was waiting in Cortile San Damaso with the car to take him back home. I had never seen him angry before.
Yeah.
Gagnon was a very pleasant, easygoing man, but I'd never seen him angry. He was angry. And he didn't say anything when we got in the car, but he was beet red. He's sort of like me in color. When we get embarrassed or we get angry, it shows immediately because we turn red. But he was in the car, and I could see that he was angry, and he didn't speak for about a minute. And then he said to me, "The day after tomorrow, are you free?" And I said, "I'll make myself free. What do you want?" And he said, "Why don't you take me to the airport?" He said, "I quit. I quit. I can't do this anymore." Right? I said,
when
he submitted, Excellency, think what you're doing there. I mean, I'm a priest 2 years, and I'm counseling an archbishop what he should do. But anyway, he said no. He said, "This is. I'm going back to Colombia. I was happier in the jungle.
Yeah.
This is impossible. He left. He left.
Mhm.
I drove him to the airport. He resigned. He gave me his resignation. I took it up to the Secretary of State. I had a bout with Cardinal Below. Anyway, he left, and that was it. Before he left, he told John Paul II, when he was presenting those documents, he said, Holy
Mhm.
Father, there are some urgent matters that you have to take care of here in Rome, here in the Vatican.
Yeah.
Well, they're not so, blah, 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 blah. He said, Holy Father, there's a plot to kill you. Do you know that? He said, I have it here.
Mhm.
I have it in my report. He said,
Yeah.
it's not that I haven't been doing anything for 3 years. He said, and since you were elected, more news has come to me to bring to you. There's a plot to kill you. No. And his words were, who would want to kill the Pope? Anyway, he told him a couple other things too, a couple other personal things, right?
Mhm.
And then he left. I took him to the airport. He left for Colombia. When the Pope was shot and almost
Right.
killed, and he was in the Gemelli Hospital, and they put him in he was in an induced coma for the longest time. When he got out of coma and got his sense about himself, they say, I was not there, but they say, and from good sources, that the first thing out of his mouth was, find Gagnon.
Mhm. Yeah.
Find Gagnon.
Yeah.
Look for Gagnon. Well, they found Gagnon, and he ordered him back to Rome, made him a cardinal, and got rid of Baggio. Right?
Yep.
So that was that he started, but it was almost too little, too late.
Right.
Baggio had named the majority of the bishops in the world.
Yeah. Right. I mean,
in the years that he was there for almost 13, 14 years or something.
right.
It was amazing because, and all of the bishops that he named were young men.
Right.
So
I
were
mean,
Howard Hubbard bishops for 25 years. Yeah.
right. Howard Hubbard was appointed in 1977.
Oh,
Matthew Clark was
God
appointed in
help us, yes.
1979.
Yeah.
And they were, Hubbard and Clark both just recently died, but they were in their 50s when
They were appointed. They were appointed in 79.
So 77 and 79 respectively. Yeah.
Oh, they were Baggio boys.
Yes. Yes, they were.
Precisely. That's exactly right.
So it's
Those are the type of men that he thought were great bishops, right? So
yeah.
and you see, Michael, when I say the reason that I wrote this book, I had a premonition that I was going to die soon a few years ago. I said, well, I'm still here, so I was wrong. But I said, I want to get this book done before I die. I want this story told because it's true. Well, unfortunately, I'm like the only person who knows this. Cardinal Gagnon is dead. Mario Marini is dead. Right? And I felt kind of the lone man out there. I'm telling this to people, and people are saying, well, who are you? Right? Well, then from the Lepanto Institute in Rome, Dr. Roberto, right? Dr. Roberto De Mattei contacted me out of the blue.
Oh, wow.
He said, I just finished reading your book. He said, it's excellent. He said, would you permit me to write the foreword?
Wow.
And I said, yes, but why? He said, because I was a good friend of Cardinal Gagnon and of Monsignor Mario Marini, and they told me exactly what you wrote in the book. I said, you got to be kidding me. I said, that's marvelous. Then you can attest to it. And he said, I would love to. Let me write the foreword. So he wrote the foreword to it.
No kidding. Wow.
So, but what I'm trying to do is explain, Michael, how it is we got to where we are.
You bet. You bet. One of the questions that I have for you is that Cardinal Gagnon, when he put together these documents and he presented them to the popes 3 times, Paul VI, John Paul I, and then John Paul II, was it always the same binder, or did he have copies?
No, it was, he had, I don't know if he had 3 copies made, whatever they were made. He left, when he left Rome, he left the copy that he had with Cardinal Oddi in the Congregation for the Clergy.
Okay.
Cardinal Oddi had a safe, a strong box in the Congregation for the Clergy, a safe.
Mhm.
You couldn't get in it. Nobody could break it. That's where his documents went when he left Rome. Somebody broke into the strong box and stole the documents. I read about it in the Observatorio Romano that Gagnon's documents were stolen from they had damning evidence
Mhm.
on many people in high places, right?
It sounds
So somebody broke into the safe. Don't ask me who, don't ask me why. They did an investigation. They came up with nothing. But I read about it. I was in New York, I think, at the time, and I read about it. I couldn't believe it. But it was in the Observatorio Romano front page that somebody had broken into and taken the documents. That was it. But
so
the
it seems to
Vatican
me-
has those documents. The Vatican has
Mhm.
those documents. And as much as I can, I'm one little voice out here on nobody, I'm doing as much as I can to put pressure on them to release those documents. It's almost 50 years. It's
Mhm.
almost 50 years, right? It's time. And especially now that we have a pope who's really concerned with transparency and openness. I
Mhm.
thought this would be a great time for Papa Bergoglio to show us those documents, see what happened, what was
Yeah.
happening during those crucial years. Also during those years when he was made a bishop.
Well, yeah, and my understanding, Martini, was it Cardinal Martini or Bishop Martini? I can't remember. Was
He was the
basically
rector. He was the rector of the Gregorian University when I was a student there.
ah.
I went to go see him. A very tall man, very aristocratic,
Mhm.
bella figura. He knew how to present himself and very intelligent. I won't take that away from him. Very intelligent, very well prepared. But I remember talking to him about a couple classes. I said, there are a couple Jesuit professors who are saying things that are contrary to the Catholic faith. I mean, they're teaching. He said, perhaps you should go elsewhere to study. That was his answer.
Wow.
I said, you're the rector. I'm bringing this to your attention. This is
Uh-huh.
what this was said, and this. I said, these are not. I'm not. These aren't scare tactics, or they're not nitpicking. I mean, these were major things that were being said that were contrary to the faith. I said, perhaps you should study elsewhere. That was the answer.
understanding is that he not only was he the kingmaker behind Bergoglio, that he was the influence that kind of helped raise him through the ranks, that pushed for him to be made a bishop as a Jesuit, helped push for him to be made a Jesuit.
You read what his superior, Bergoglio's superior, said when he was asked about Bergoglio as a candidate.
Mm-mm.
Oh, you must look that up. You must look it up. I'm not going to tell you what he said, but you should read it for yourself. Okay?
I will.
Anyway, look, I've got to go now. I've got to go now. I've got somebody else waiting for me. Michael, I just want to tell you this. The reason that I wrote this book was not to make money or fame. Really wasn't. It was to leave a legacy, a small one, my little contribution to how we got where we got, how we got here. When did this happen? When did this start? And it started majorly during that man who was naming all of the Catholic bishops.
Yeah.
It never got put back together. It never got put back together. This is the problem we're living in still today.
Well, Father, we could talk for a couple more hours, at least, I'm sure.
We could talk until the cows come home.
You bet. And I would love to actually continue this conversation at some later date. I'd love to bring you back on.
Sure.
We'll continue this conversation. Sure. We'll talk some more about the depth of the problem and how, who else is involved and that kind of thing. I'd really like to map it out with you. I think that's exactly what people need. But I know you have to go. And if you would please close us up with an Ave and give us your benediction.
Certainly. Ave Maria, gratia plena Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostre. Amen. Benedictio Dei omnipotent, Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sanctus, descendit super vos et manit semper. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much, Michael, for the privilege of being on your program and the privilege finally of meeting you.
Yes.
And I can't say in person, but personally. This is a
Yes.
personal encounter, right? Yeah, good.
Well, please God, someday we will.
We'll see you at a later date, God willing, okay?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Father. God bless you.
And God bless you all of the work you're doing. It's good.
Thank you so
It's good.
much. All right.
God
I'll
bless.
see you all next week.